You're listening to Biotech Hangout, a live and unedited weekly discussion of all the latest news in our industry with a group of biotech insiders. I'm Eric Schmidt, and my co-hosts today are Yaron Werber, Sam Fazeli, and Tess Cameron. For more information about our hosts and guest speakers, or to listen in to the most recent episode, please go to biotechhangout.com. Okay, well, a busy week, maybe not quite as busy as we've had in the past, given we're past the earnings season, and I don't think there are any major medical meetings, but still plenty to talk about. Who better to talk about this stuff, of course, than Sam and Yaron and Tess. So thanks, guys, for being part of this week's hangout. We're going to start with a little bit of a discussion of M&A. Obviously, mergers and acquisitions are something we've talked a lot about on this show, but boy, are things heating up. Another few deals to discuss, and of course, coming off the heels of Merck's major acquisition of CDTX last week, they then laid out their guidance surrounding what the acquisition means to them. But Yaron, maybe you want to start off with the latest salvo in the bid for Avadel.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is interesting. I got to tell you, even for me, particularly personally, because I spent about 3.5 years or so in a biotech company, and we were looking at orphan drugs, trying to license things, and we actually found these sort of drugs under development, a long time ago, and this is years ago, and we were trying to license them, but of course it was impossible because they were already looking so good that, of course, no, people didn't want to sell them to us. So Avadel, we're talking about narcolepsy, and the drug specifically here is approved. It's called Lumryz. It's a once nightly extended release. It's a sodium oxybate for narcolepsy. It's the only once at bedtime oxybate versus Jazz Xyrem, which twice nightly. I was approved in 2023, then got a pediatric expansion in 2024. So we're talking about this is sort of year two, one or two into the launch. And this year it's going to be doing between 240 and 260 million in sales, up 50% year over year. So pretty interesting. And so Alkermes actually agreed to acquire Avadel on October 22nd for $20 a share. It was 18 and a half in cash and $1.50 for CVR. And if they get FDA approval for what's known as idiopathic hypersomnia by the end of 28, idiopathic hypersomnia is actually very important. And Eric, you remember a lot of this market back in the days when you were covering Provigil and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, Alkermes wants it specifically as a beachhead because they do have an orexin 2 agonist in development as well. And there was actually a no shopping super proposal, superior proposal language in the deal, including matching right, which was obviously prescient and fairly wise. Well, 3 weeks later, Lundbeck showed up unannounced with a $23 bid, up $3 essentially. The way it was structured, funny enough, it was $21 in cash and a $2 CVR, broken into two specific things, but those were $1 each on the CVR for sales-based milestones. The board found that it's obviously a superior proposal, and that triggered a 5-day, I believe, match to a right to Alkermes. So Alkermes came back and said, we'll match the 21 in cash, but we'll only give you $1.50 in CVR, so it's 50 cents less. But it's only tied on approval again, same approval of IH by 2028 with no sales threshold. So the board said, yep, that's good enough, and we'll take it. So Alkermes seems to have won out. They're going to close it out by Q1. It's what it's expected. So great to see it. Alkermes said it's going to be accretive immediately. Just to put it in context, I mean, we're talking about a $2.4 billion deal for a drug. Let's say it's going to do 250. So it sounds expensive, 10 times sort of current year. But remember, that 250 is probably going to end up being, I don't know, I don't cover this area, but a lot higher. So if it's doing 5 to 750, it's a deal that's, 3.5 to 5 times. I mean, pretty sensible and accretive year one. So kudos for Alkermes for getting this. Seems to be getting this done.
Did we lose Eric?
Mm,
I still see him. I
we
still
might.
see him
Yeah,
here.
so
My
He's
do I.
bad,
just
my bad. I
curious.
was on, I'm here. Thank
You
you.
were talking
Yaron,
to
thanks for
yourself?
that. I was just for a few minutes at least, Sam. Thanks. Um, Terrific recap. Thank you, Yaron. I guess the significance of this in the biotech world is this is now the second of two transactions that were very competitive, very publicly competitive, and with a lot of maybe even animosity across the parties. This following obviously last month's discussion around Metsera and whether Pfizer or Novartis was going to grab that deal. And these types of publicly competitive auctions are things that we rarely see. I can't actually remember the last one. Maybe you guys have better memories than I, but it certainly speaks to a pretty heated M&A environment. And I know we also had a fairly remarkable transaction in the private sector, Halda Therapeutics being bought by J&J for about $3 billion. I believe this is the largest ever phase one stage company acquisition, $3 billion for a phase one company. Sam, I don't know if you want to introduce the transaction or I
Yeah.
can, but go ahead.
I'll take it. The one thing I do want to just highlight is don't forget the two bidding wars involved Danish companies. And I don't know if it's got anything to do with Greenland or not, but I'm jesting, of course. Novo for Metsera and here Lundbeck. So, but the J&J deal is very interesting. Is it the largest? I think the data that I've looked at suggests it could be, but I'm pretty sure one of our listeners following up on Twitter will probably tell us, no, you missed this one that was 3.1 or 3.2. What is interesting, of course, is that this is J&J, i.e. the king of prostate cancer, at least in the small molecule world. And how times have changed. J&J paid $1 billion for a phase 3 asset, which ended up being called Zytiga back in 2000 something, was it 2009, from Kruger Biotech. I'm sure you all remember that. And yeah, it was 2009. I've just checked. And that was phase 3. I said about the $1 billion. Here we are in a phase 1. I said about $3 billion. Should we take a signal there? I don't know. I mean, all I'm saying is that here's a deal that is a company who knows about the space and they're going to pay this number. It is a HLD 0915. It's a first in class oral small molecule hold and kill mechanism. So it binds together with the androgen receptor and then a key transcriptional factor, which then the complex results in the cell. I think it's via apoptosis, but I'm sure Eric will correct me if it's not apoptosis. But I think the data that we saw at the triple meeting for the late line, pretty much end stage, heavily pretreated prostate cancer patients was pretty impressive. It is an area where bispecifics, radioligands with a million different isotopes and ADCs, which are not convenient, and we haven't really seen much evidence that they are particularly super effective. They are, of course, to a degree, but here you come with a potential small molecule that you can combine with the rest of the assets that Johnson and Johnson has. I know they have a very active prostate research space, at least. So this would have passed under the nose of, I'm pretty sure, Chuck Drake, who runs the research on prostate cancer there at J&J, and I think it's an attractive asset, and it really does fit very well with the possibility of maybe even doing. I don't know if it's going to be possible to do a fixed dose combination with another of the small molecules that J&J has, but it certainly helps with the patent expiry that is coming up again for another of J&J assets in the soonish. So that's what I would have. Those are the things that I picked out of this, Eric.
Yeah, no, that's terrific.
And
Add on a couple of
Sam,
things.
I did actually have those stats. So this was the most expensive, the highest, the highest priced acquisition for a company at that stage. I think the next one after that was Velos Bio, which was back a couple
Ah,
of years
yes.
ago, where Merck acquired them for
Mm.
2.75. So we did look up those stats, and indeed, it's an impressive, impressive M&A for a company at that stage.
Mm.
That's
And I think it
amazing.
speaks
Thank you,
to
Tess.
exactly the point that Eric was talking about earlier, which is we're seeing in the public market, certainly we're seeing more competition. Looking at the, statistics, I think this was up through 2024. Most deals didn't have multiple first round bidders, right? I think it was like, if you look at the 5 years before 2024, these are stats that we got from Centerview. I think only 35% of deals had multiple first round bidders, right? So it was really like, hey, you have your shot, and probably the party that puts in the bid is going to win. And we do seem to be seeing heightened competition very publicly in a few cases, which is also exceptional. But also in the SEC filings that are coming out post deal. So that's a real shift, and seeing that they have, maybe a bit of a window where the FTC might be a bit more lenient on some of these deals, but also if they see their peers getting very active, they get more concerned that they're going to have to be competitive as well to win the deals that they want.
Tess, do you know if this was a competitive bid? I mean, the numbers suggest it might have been competitive.
My assumption for these private deals that happen, and I can't speak to to this one because we were a holder here, and we had team members who were involved. But whenever I see a private deal that is on the order of a few $1 billion, or kind of over that 1.5 billion mark, my assumption is that those are typically competitive processes.
And I have heard from others involved, like I'm not involved, of course, so I can speculate, but I've heard that this was a nearly 10x return for the VCs who were involved. So congrats to RA and others who saw the promise here. Sam, you were right to point out that, relative to what J&J paid many, many years ago for Cougar, I know that's a name that Yaron and I had some involvement in back then, and we were quite thrilled at the time for a $1 billion acquisition for then a phase 3 asset. But one thing that maybe makes that a little bit apples to oranges comparison is not just the price tag, but also the fact that Halda has a really cool technology platform, which of course Cougar never did. And Halda, I think it means hold, maybe in Danish, I don't know, or some Old Norse type language. But the technology itself means that you do hold and kill cancer cells specifically by sequestering tumor antigens to a essential cell protein and sequestering that essential cell protein from the cell's essential biology. And it's a really cool methodology. Obviously, it has been shown to have some proof of concept in terms of the data that you referenced from, I think, the triple meeting just a few weeks ago. So again, congrats to all involved. It's nice to see so much M&A in this space, and Tess will give you a shout out. I know that RA Capital was very closely involved in the Cidara transaction that was announced just a week ago today, with Merck paying nearly $10 billion for that asset, CD388, for prophylaxis of influenza. Merck did hold a discussion, I think it was on Monday of this week, about the transaction and gave some guidance. They put out some very, very high numbers for CD388. What should we make from this acquisition?
Yeah, my perspective here is obviously, and just, I'll start with just a, huge congratulations to Jeff Stein and the Cidara team for really, having the conviction to move this program forward very aggressively. I think there's several interesting learnings here. I think that Merck certainly saw the promise of of the drug, a very unique drug that can basically be a flu prevention. And they came out with some pretty aggressive, peak sales numbers. And I thought what was really interesting is they, in addition to talking about peak sales, and talking about peak sales as being over 5 billion, and kind of going through the details of what supports that $5 billion market. And I think there's two things just to highlight. I think one is that they did really emphasize, hey, we're initially looking at these patients who are high risk patients. But I think that's kind of point one. But also recognizing, hey, this could be relevant for a broader population as well. Obviously, they'll focus initially on that high risk patient population. But then, second point, and Eric, we've had conversations previously about the importance of companies doing work on cost effectiveness, right? And looking at cost effectiveness broadly from like a generalized cost effectiveness standpoint. And Sadara had actually done a lot of that work and published, some of that work. We shared some of that work on Rapport. And Merck actually talked about that. So, they talked about Sadara's pricing research and, said that at price points up to $600, dollars per course, this was very effective, and had the potential to not be subject to access restrictions. And I think that kind of comes back to the importance of like every company, no matter, if you still have like, Sadara had a couple, really big phase threes in front of it that they were going to run. And they really had the foresight of like doing a lot of this commercial work and thinking about the opportunity very thoroughly around the time of POC when they had a good understanding of what the product profile could be. And that included, thinking about patient populations, and that included thinking about pricing and really doing a robust GCEA analysis. And I think it just reinforces the importance of every company doing that, right? Because that is obviously something helpful for you and something helpful for your investors and prospective investors. But that's also really important for strategics, right? Everyone's working on tight timelines, and for you to have, really thorough research supporting the opportunity and supporting a potential price point, that can really help a potential acquirer gain conviction in a market opportunity.
Thanks for that recap. Let's open up this broader discussion on M&A just to put some perspective on it. A few weeks ago, we had Novartis buying Avidity for $12 billion. That I believe, and again, maybe one of our listeners will correct us, I believe that was the largest ever dollar amount for a pre-phase three company. This week, we mentioned J&J Halda, and thanks to Tess for fact checking, at $3 billion is the biggest ever phase one transaction. And I believe just a couple months ago, the AbbVie Capstan deal at about $2 billion evaluation was the largest ever preclinical transaction. So we've been setting some records in biotech M&A left and right for the past few months. Tess, you mentioned that these deals may be more competitive because the FTC has been playing nice in the sandbox, and maybe also competition is begetting more competition in terms of getting pharma up off of its seat and into the game. But I'm curious as to the broader team's thoughts here on what's going on, what might be truly creating this wave, and what pharma might be looking for next. Yaron, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, the one thing that immediately jumps up is the cost, the price of drugs has gone up a lot, right? So back in the days, Eric, right in 2009, no one thought Zytiga was going to be that big. Now, as you said, Merck is putting $5 billion for flu vaccine, prophy, type drugs. So I think that the cost of drugs is probably one of the drivers.
Well,
Yes,
I
Sam.
just point to another, another driver that is, really the uh, like I think a lot of companies have actually sorted through the kind of 2026, or it's at least like priced in, right? Like the, hey, what's going to happen in 2026, 2027 in terms of patent portfolio, patent cliff, and have a bit of like a longer view about what they want to build to be competitive without having this like, oh my gosh, like can we just solve like next year or like 2 years from now, which was really kind of the tone. Like if you recall, a couple of years ago, it was kind of like, are you not going to get bought unless you have a phase three and you're like fulfilling like an immediate need? And I think that is like a really positive development because it creates space for some of these more, more strategic kind of platform transactions and more strategic, like, portfolio and franchise, deals that maybe maybe longer term. And that's really helpful and important for biotech because it means that like there's an understanding that strategic could jump in at an earlier stage, right? They're not going to have to, you're not going to have to wait and necessarily commercialize everything yourself. And I think that combined with the fact that actually the past year or 2 years have seen several biotechs come out and like commercialize exceptionally well themselves, like, that is also a very helpful, fact pattern to point to.
Yeah, I'll just add also that, and I don't, so the clarity that we've got now from the administration, I think has been very helpful. The lack of worry about FTC issues, unless you're Novo trying to buy Metsera against Pfizer, is another element. But I would say, because we keep thinking that it's all about LOEs, and Novartis, for instance, did this deal, which of course was in the sweet spot of what they're looking for with Avidity. And everyone talks about Novartis Cosentyx going off patent. Our patent team at Bloomberg Intelligence has just done an analysis that suggests that Cosentyx can be quite, I'm not going to say easily, but can be protected for way beyond this molecule patent expiry, which reminds me of the Humira days. So I don't know how much of it is driven by that necessarily anymore. Every time I look at these LOEs, and they're also looking at Keytruda. I'm not quite sure what will happen there and what the outcome will be, but it would be interesting if none of these drugs, big drugs for these companies, end up actually going off patent in the dates that we're looking for. And then these acquisitions will be quite significant in terms of the accretion they give the companies on top of what didn't expire. So we'll wait and see.
Interesting point. What about the role that M&A is playing in terms of promulgating this biotech rally? It seems like we're almost growing accustomed to waking up on a Monday morning and having a nice splashy deal on the tape. I wonder, are we getting too addicted to M&A? What might happen when this M&A trade starts to deteriorate? Of course, we are biotech analysts, so we like to take a glass half empty view of things. Anyone have thoughts as to whether the industry is dependent upon M&A at this stage for the rally to continue?
Let me chime in. I personally don't think so, because I think the valuations are coming off trough valuations. And look, large cap, as we know, is a tale of two cities. They're the ones that are looking really good, and they're trading based on growth. In the mid cap, there's always going to be concentration toward M&A names. But people I think, are willing to pay up for good growth, good prospects, good probability of success. Small cap is in a recovery mode. Valuations have gone up, but valuations are still not bad at all. I mean, we have names all right. Eric, chime in as well. Up 4x or whatever it is, up 3x, but they're making it up. They're trading at $1 billion market cap now with 400 million in cash. They were trading sub cash before. And we think they're going to have $1 to $2 billion product. And if you do the proverbial 4 multiple, it should be a $4 to $8 billion company trading now at $1 billion, admittedly up fourfold, but it was so distressed previously. So I would say valuations still are, still early, sort of in a recovery.
No, I actually agree with you, Ron, and I like the point that Tess made, that many biotech companies are not dependent upon M&A because they're showing that they can launch these drugs themselves and have good success in doing so, and a relatively quick ramp to profitability. Of course, you're on the point you made earlier that drug pricing is much higher than it ever was, is facilitating those launches and that ramp toward profitability. And in some ways, you could argue the converse of what I just suggested, which is that M&A is bad for the sector. And in losing Sonora, in losing Halda, in losing Avidity, we may be in the future depriving ourselves of some wonderful mid-cap success stories that would only strengthen the quality of the companies that we have to follow, and strengthen the components of the biotech index, and be viewed as strengthening our sector for the long term. I know that at least that's my partner Josh Schimmer's views on occasion. So let's wrap up our M&A discussion and move to a little bit more of a discussion around Washington policy. Sam, you picked up on some very interesting changes to the CDC website with regard to vaccine safety. Unfortunately, this issue was in the news more broadly this week as well. But why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I think, Eric, this also ties into our conversation later, if we do get to it, about Moderna and their guidance and forecasts and hopes. So this is what we didn't think would happen. Well, maybe we all did think it would happen, but it wasn't supposed to, because um, Secretary Kennedy's deposition or comments at the Senate hearings that he had before being given the final approval to be the HHS secretary, said that that we're not going to do anything to undermine vaccines, etc. And here we have the CDC page, vaccine safety. I'm looking at it, saying autism and vaccines. 19th of November, the claim vaccines do not cause autism is not an evidence-based claim because studies have not ruled out the possibility that infant vaccines cause autism. Okay, so we've got at least 16 well-controlled population-based studies that show that there is no clear association between, and no association, I'm not going to even leave it at clear, no association between vaccinations, particularly MMR, which is the one that everybody keeps going on about, and autism, and even thimerosal, which was something that they discussed, not necessarily linked. So what I don't know is the CDC expecting here. Are they going to suggest somebody, which is who, needs to do a prospectively designed clinical trial that takes a group of newborns and gives them no vaccines, and a group of newborns and gives them whatever vaccines, and then looks to see what happens over the next 5 years to the risk of developing autism? What is that the proposal? And if that is the proposal, who's going to do it? Who's going to fund it? How ethical is it? Which pediatrician would agree to do that? How do they enroll these subjects, etc.? And so that becomes a major issue. And you can't. I don't really know where to take this beyond what I've just said. What I do know is that the more this happens, the more you're going to get that negativity around vaccines. And I think even clear-minded folk are becoming a little bit worried, thinking, oh, maybe there is a link. Maybe I should worry a little bit here. And of course, that all that does is that it increases hesitancy toward vaccines. So not a good step forward again. And I want to repeat, this is not a US issue. This is everywhere. How is it that in Canada we have such a massive rise in measles this year that they lost their WHO designation as having got rid of measles. So, and that's, they don't have a Secretary Kennedy there or a CDC with a website like this. So this is a problem everywhere. I think it's something that's not US specific at all. I'll leave
Great
it at
point,
that.
Sam. Just a great point on having to prove the negative in order to maybe satisfy the MAHA critics around vaccine safety and this link to autism. It's impossible to do. You could create any conspiracy theory and put it out there and say, well, prove me wrong. And of course, a lot of wasted resources would be spent doing so, but the answer probably is an obvious one. The other thing about this CDC webpage is I think you mentioned this to me in an email. This is exactly what RFK Jr. had promised Senator Bill Cassidy that he would not do during his confirmation hearings. I think this was very explicit as part of his confirmation process that he would not remove the CDC statement on vaccines and autism. So that webpage that you're looking at, it does still say, I believe, that vaccines are not associated with autism. Those words are there, but they're now, I think, have an asterisk next to them that says that this claim is not evidence-based. So there's a lot of wordsmithing going on, playing with, I'd say, semantics to
It's
maybe.
the footnote, Eric. It says the header "Vaccines do not cause autism" has been removed due to agreement with the chair of HELP, so Cassidy. So it's just incredible.
It's bizarre.
There's yes, absolutely.
You would think that the MAHA movement would lose some credibility by going through that type of a tactic, but we'll see how long this lasts and what Senator Cassidy's response might be. I don't know. More vaccine non-science. There was an article in Scientific American this week just calling out some comments that RFK Jr. made earlier in the week on peanut allergies. Apparently, he's now throwing out the rise in peanut allergy prevalence to potentially some tie to vaccines and aluminum. This despite any indication of a scientific link. So I guess in RFK's world, any type of increased incidence of disease could be associated with the vaccine usage. And again, you need to prove the negative. I found the article in the Wall Street Journal last weekend to be quite interesting as well. I don't know if you all read that, but it did report on some increased tension between RFK and Dr. Makary. And some of that was stylistic about, how Dr. Makary might be running the FDA. But I think a little bit also was potentially oriented around their different philosophies around drug development. And I don't know, Tess, I know you and the great people at No Patient Left Behind certainly believe adamantly that a stronger FDA is critical to the success of our industry. The No Patient Left Behind group has done a wonderful public service for all of us in biotech by trying to, I'd say, harness the people within our industry and fight for that strong FDA. Maybe just want to recap your latest initiative, but also where are you in thinking that we can have a scientifically driven, whether it's CDC or FDA or any set of government agencies under this HHS Secretary RFK Jr.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to the second question first, low confidence until we see something different. So, I think we'll have to, what's interesting is to kind of, I guess, contrast the decisions that we've seen with on the non-vaccine side, right? So let's separate out kind of vaccines and everything else. And on vaccines, I think we're seeing, a lot that is really not, scientifically driven. For everything else, when we look at the actual decisions that have been made, look, there have been some more borderline decisions that you could argue either way, but there isn't any drug that we've seen where it's like, oh, it's like a total home run. This should obviously be approved, and it like hasn't, right? It's more these cases where like there is debate. So that is kind of interesting from like a decision standpoint. But I think going beyond that and just hearing what companies are going through, and like we've heard some of this publicly where Unicure was like, we have alignment. And then it's like, oh, wait, actually, the FDA said something different. And that is what really comes out in the FDA survey that we did. And we did an FDA survey of companies in April. We did another survey more recently. And I think the April survey was interesting, where we were seeing a little bit of like, hey, there were some companies that were having challenges getting the right people. And there were a lot of like DOGE impacts that the FDA was still working through. But overall, I'd say there were also several companies that were really impressed with like, wow, like the FDA has actually continued to provide us with like really important advice as we move forward in our clinical development path. But in this November survey, it was like, oh my goodness, like 82% of respondents said they were worried about the FDA's ability to function. And some of the examples and case studies that we heard about were really challenging. We're like, companies had requested meetings and they couldn't get meetings. Everything was just written response only, and like none of their reviewers had any background in the therapeutic area that they were looking at, or that the entire team had like turned over, or that they didn't actually review the package properly and like missed key data. And this is a real challenge, like, and it makes me worried for when we're actually going to see this play out, because this can affect a company that is going and doing their phase two, right? And they thought their phase two design was okay, and you know maybe they couldn't get exactly the feedback that they were looking for from the FDA, and so they had to kind of like take a chance and go forward with something. But how is that going to impact them down the road when they have to come back and like talk about their registrational trial and inform like what the trial design should look like? So these are real challenges, this uncertainty and like lack of challenges getting quality feedback. I think that's a real issue, and confusion about what counts and where the bar is really a challenge for companies at every stage, and it can hamper the development path for any drug that is not like incredibly straightforward and has a lot of precedent for what the clinical trial design should look like.
Well, wonderful insights. Thanks for sharing that survey result. Yaron, your thoughts on whether a scientific organization like the FDA can operate and thrive under an RFK Jr.-led HHS, and if not, what do you think is going to give next?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can contribute a lot that hasn't been said. We're seeing the assault on science in a scientific way, in a traditional way. Um, I think that what's even more surprising, a point about the Wall Street Journal article, was, I believe it was an endpoint or a stat article talking about how tight JFK Jr. and Trump are. And of course, most of us didn't expect that. People were ship. It's actually proven to be incorrect. So that is concerning. And what's also becoming pretty evident is this is not just coming from RFK Jr. It's also coming from the president directly. This is going to have legs, and this is going to have long-term consequences, which are concerning. And I think it's also tied to a certain degree as to the overall administration to a certain degree, and what's going to be the outlook of who's going to be the next administration and what's their view is going to be, because this is going to have decades worth of connotation. So things are getting done in the meantime. Things are getting a little bit harder to call. What's probably more concerning is the early programs that are not getting reviewed, and the implication long term, because when you have delays there, that's not going to be a CRL with 6 months. It could be 2 or 3 year delays. So this is going to be a new dawn for us. We all remember the times where FDA was not so functional, and that did have connotations on the sector. Again, I think the good news perhaps is that we're coming off trough valuations. And so some of that is probably incorporated to a certain degree, but this is going to be something that we're going to have to sort through with time.
Sam, anything you want to add on this topic? Go ahead,
Just
Tess.
a
Oh, sorry. I
just a
was just
quick.
going to add, like the Pazdur. Like, I just wanted to
Yeah,
make sure I highlight like a positive, which is like
yeah.
Pazdur, definitely a positive, big positive. Sorry, Sam.
So let me leverage off you there. The only thing I'm worried about is a stat article from Adam saying Rick Pazdur fighting with Vinay Prasad. So because remember, Dr. Prasad still has the chief scientific officer title, I think, unless that's changed too. But we have this issue now that you have and I think Rick Pazdur is not somebody who you can just steamroll over. And I think I'm going to assume that I am right in that he has a very, very clean background. None of the issues that eventually ended up causing a problem for Tidmarsh, etc. So that's the one thing I'm worried about. The Adam article or one of his colleagues on a Tuesday or Wednesday saying, "Oh, there's a massive rift here."
Okay, well, hopefully we'll cross our fingers and cooler heads will be prevailing at the FDA, including for the benefit of science. Let's turn our discussion to a couple of news items from the week on drug pricing. And Yaron, you noted the Arrowhead approval for FCS and the substantially lower price point at which they're going to be introducing their drug relative to Ionis. Sam, I know you've been following the GLP-1 pricing wars. So maybe Yaron, just start off with a quick recap of what happened over at Arrowhead and why they chose to do what they did.
Absolutely. Actually, maybe I'll go on a very quick point here, because that's relevant, and maybe put my own kind of earlier comment into perspective. So we just hosted a call yesterday with a Harvard professor who's done an analysis, drug costs overall, branded drug costs in the last 10 years or so. And I think the analysis is, you guys said 2 or 3 years ago, but 20%. The gross prices went up 11.9. The actual net prices went up 1.9%. So it's one thing it's important to keep in mind, overall, net pricing is not going up so quickly. But let's talk about Arrowhead versus Ionis here, and this is really interesting. So recall these are both AP3 drugs. Um, they are both looking really, really good. The one from Ionis is an ASO. It's injected every month, and the one from Arrowhead is an siRNA. It's injected every 3 months. And Ionis is ahead. So Ionis got approval in FCS, in familial chylomicronemia syndrome. Patients who have a genetic abnormality, they have high triglycerides or fats in their blood, and it can cause acute pancreatitis. This is an ultra orphan indication, about 1,000 patients in the U.S., and they priced it at 595,000 for an ASO. In the meantime, they just read out the data for severe high triglycerides, which is the same. It's just not genetically confirmed. That's a much bigger price. So they're talking that they think the price will go down from 595 because it's the same drug and the same dosing to, let's say, 10 to 20,000, perhaps 15 to 20,000. In the meantime,
Eric,
yeah.
your signal keeps deteriorating.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? So why don't you go ahead, Sam?
We can hear you well enough, Yaron. I'd continue. Yaron, are you there? Oh, no, we can't hear you. Sam, do you want to follow up on Arrowhead Ionis, or would you like me to, or where do you want to go?
I'm suffering. I'm not hearing you very well either. I wonder if it's a system problem. So can you guys hear me?
I hear
We
you
can hear
fine,
you.
and I hear Eric fine. It was just your own for
Okay.
me as well.
Okay, well, I'll keep going, and then I'll see if I can switch my feed. So yeah, so we had Novo, obviously, as Eric you put it, dropping their price again for semaglutide or Wegovy. Now starting doses of $200 per month, starting doses of $200 per month through the first quarter, after which it goes up to $350 per month on average versus $500 a month previously, similar to GLP-1. This is similar to the GLP-1 pricing out of Trump RX. Now, what's interesting is that I suppose you could read this, this is the only way I think I can read this, as trying to compete for new patient starts as we go into the back end of the year, and in what's clearly a price sensitive market. So and Novo is playing catch up in this space, and this was clear. I mean, if you listen to their third quarter results, which were night and day compared to Lilly, right? And of course, we've known all along that Lilly's Zepbound, so tirzepatide, does have arguably a better weight loss profile. I mean, I think they've shown that in a head-to-head trial. So, and also sleep apnea indication. So we could maybe also now see that Lilly is going to do the same thing and bring down the price. So, or at least to try and compete this out, or maybe they just sit back and wait for their believe that their profile is sufficiently strong that would withstand this. I just want to highlight that the multi-dose pen is going to be available at the lowest price, around $299. So that's a pretty significant, hefty discount that Nova's offering, at least in the short term. Now, there's obviously, you've got the Medicare and Medicaid action coming in, and the $350 price for Wegovy and Zepbound and orforglipron from Trump RX. And the oral GLP-1s are now on a starting dose of $150 per month. And yet nobody is changing their models with regards to the massive potential for this market, because everybody believes, and we concur with that, that the lower the prices come, the more likely you're going to get volume compensating for it. Over.
So I think the point that Yaron was probably likely to make, and Yaron,
Yeah,
I don't. Oh,
I'm
you're back.
on.
Go ahead.
If you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can hear. Yeah. So Eric, chime in. So I don't know where I left off, but the price from Ionis will go down from 595 for the ultra orphan indication, genetically based, to the same drug, same dose, obviously in a much bigger market. They're going to file and get approved late next year. That price is going to go from 595, they're saying, to, let's say, 15 to 20, and most of us are thinking it'd be incrementally more. Well, Arrowhead is behind. So what they did, and because they're behind, they're running slightly different studies. So they just got approved for the ultra orphan indication. And of course, the eye on the prize is the bigger indication, the SHTG, where they're not going to have, Arrowhead's not going to have their data until, let's say, Q3 or so next year. And because they were behind, they ran slightly different studies, which are geared to inevitably looking at higher risk patients. So keeping an eye on the price, they're already pricing it now for the high risk population only of the bigger market. So they ended up pricing it at 60,000 or a 90% discount to the Ionis price currently. Again, so they're pricing it at 60, and Ionis is talking about pricing ultimately for the big indication, let's say 15 to 20. So an interesting situation. And people are now asking, so what does this mean? Does that mean that Ionis now has a quote unquote license to price it higher, up to 60? On our calls with management publicly, they're saying that they think people are asking about the Rezdiffra price for Madrigal, which is around 50,000, and management saying that's too high because they're not thinking it's just going to get used in high risk. It's going to get very broadly. So they're continuing to index toward 15 to 20. So it looks like at the end, the bottom line, they'll have similar potentially labels, Coke and Pepsi, slight differences, but they're probably going to contract very differently with payers. And maybe Arrowhead, because of their studies, is going to contract for the higher risk big market, whereas Ionis, because their studies were broader and they have data on everybody, will inevitably contract much more broadly. I bet you at the end, our guess is that Ionis price is at north of 20. So I don't know if it's going to be 25, that's always in the model, or maybe 30, and maybe eventually Arrowhead discounts a little bit. And that's kind of where Colibrium is going to end up. But it's going to be, these are great drugs, and it should be really be a big market. And as a firm, we like both stocks a lot.
Well, it's such a fascinating scenario analysis that's playing out here with two pretty similar drugs that'll have fairly similar labels at least, but maybe different pricing and a different strategy for going after, as you say, around the severe end of the market versus maybe the more common and generic form of hypertriglyceridemia. We'll see. But I guess the broader theme here is we are starting to see drug pricing come down, not up. Historically, we used to say that the drug prices only move in one direction, that was up. And we rarely, if ever, saw companies cut the price of their drug on a net or wholesale adjusted basis. So I don't know, are we seeing a change here, or are these therapeutic categories becoming so dense and competitive that we might see more of this sort of thing? Tess, do you have any views?
I think a lot of it comes down to like, what are the incentives for PBMs and for coverage? And if we start seeing more, companies come out like Cigna was doing, saying, "Hey, like we're going to take a new approach to rebates," and Cigna talked about eliminating prescription drug rebates for some private health plans starting in 2027. So this is going to be a gradual thing. It's not all in one shot. But I think you take out, you get rid of rebates, you take away one of the top reasons for pricing high, which is leaving room to rebate, knowing that those rebates are only going to go in one direction, which is up after the drug is launched. So I think it's great to see competition in categories where look, when you have something that is just so clearly best in class, I think there's recognition that it's worth it to pay for that, for that premium, depending on how much. But this is why having some similar drug competition can actually be really helpful. It brings us back. We were talking, I think, a few weeks back about like, Me Too drugs and like, are Me Too drugs like useful and do they have merit? And like, yes, they have merit because, they can actually help bring down price and, inform another important part of competition.
Sam, your own, any other broader thoughts on the topic of drug pricing? No.
No.
The only thing to Tessa's point that I would say is we do file a gross to net, and we have a database that we do, and the average price to net discount right now in Part D, like dog, is in the 30s, and in Price B, like boy, is around high 40s. So as you said, the list price is not the real price.
And what's interesting, I think, about drug pricing in general is not that the list prices aren't going up by a dramatic level. I think you're right. You're on your analysis. I'm sure is spot on. We haven't seen huge growth in list pricing. We've certainly seen limited growth in net pricing, but what we have seen is new products come in at premiums higher than what we've ever seen. So if you try and factor that into the drug pricing discussion, maybe on a net patient basis or average patient basis, the prices are probably going up. Let's shift our discussion to yet another maybe potentially difficult decision that's going to be coming down the FDA's way. And that has to do with Agios, which had very mixed data, I would say, in sickle cell disease from their drug mitapivat, a PKR activator earlier in the week. Tess, did you want to give us the background on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So just backing up and sharing some context in sickle cell, I mean, area of huge unmet need, really, really challenging disease. And I think we all remember Oxbryta, which was a drug approved, this was Global Blood Therapeutics drug. And essentially what they saw is they didn't hit on VOC, which are the actual kind of vascular occlusion crises that these patients have, but they did hit on hemoglobin, right? And the drug was approved, and if you recall, Pfizer bought the company, and then they read out the confirmatory study that was looking at VOCs. That had been a post-marketing commitment for the company, and those they did not hit on VOCs. And I think this was a real upset for the community because the drug was also pulled, very quickly without really a lot of support for the patient community, or at least it was perceived that way by many in the patient community. And so I think everyone was hoping that mitapivat would be different, and that there would be a VOC benefit in addition to hemoglobin. And what they reported is that there was not a hit on VOC. There was a trend, including when you looked at the hemoglobin responders, and they will go back to the FDA and do a pre SNDA meeting, since the drug is currently approved. Mitapivat is currently approved for beta thal, and they'll talk about the data package and talk about that just in the context of sickle cell being an area that is incredibly high unmet need. So that is going to be a really challenging decision for for the FDA, and we will await we'll await commentary after they've had that meeting with them.
Yeah, Yaron, you mentioned some inconsistencies and difficulties that investors were having, kind of handicapping some of these rare orphan approvals, maybe in part based on changing FDA landscape. I mean, in this case, it is going to be a tough decision. Our heart goes out to the sickle cell community. They're in dire need of new therapies. The standard of care for these patients is still extremely poor. I think the life expectancy of a sickle cell patient in the United States is still hovering around 40 or so years. And there are a lot of these patients. Yes, it's a rare disease, but there are an estimated 100,000 or so such patients in the United States. And they have very little in terms of innovation. So in terms of the mitapivat study that you very kindly summarized, Tess, yeah, it hit on one of two primary endpoints, and it's going to be hard to, I think, squint and see in terms of actual data and analysis any true clinical benefit this drug brings. But Agios at least is indicating that they're going to send this down to the FDA and hope for the best. And I guess, again, this maybe brings up the broader question of, does anyone really know where the FDA is going to set the bar in rare disease? The leadership of the agency has been saying for some time, we want to err toward the side of right to try and give patients access to drugs and do things very quickly. But do we know where the bar is set? Sam, do you want to chime in on what you think should be doing differently so that maybe the drug developers have a little bit more understanding of what to do?
What you mean from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have any idea, what the FDA wants and needs right now.
No, I'm not gonna. I can't put any value. I can't say anything of value here, to be honest with you, because seems to change on a daily basis. But again, we have a situation where is this going? Is this Cedar or Cedar? It's Cedar, right?
This one will be
Um,
Cedar.
so maybe the new boss of Cedar, who has done a great job for oncology, is going to be applying his level-headed thinking to take care of these things. I mean, this is a difficult one. I have to admit. I mean, it's Tess did a great job. So maybe we can be a bit more optimistic here.
Yaron, anything you want to throw in?
Not on this one. I think you have another topic later on, which is actually super interesting.
Yeah, we don't have a
Well,
later on. We've only
yeah,
got
why
5 minutes
don't we,
left.
okay, you guys,
Okay,
I know had like,
I'll.
go ahead. You start on what you want to talk about, Yaron.
Well, I mean, we're seeing a couple of things. So I want to talk about maybe Zymeworks and then very quickly Anaptys, and the whole concept of biotech companies and how they're beginning to return cash to shareholder a little bit, and the transition to royalty models as well, and maybe monetizing things in a different way. So Zymeworks just read out with Jazz and B1 their Horizon GEA frontline study. This is a HERA, it's a HER2 bispecific, and he went head to head against Herceptin. So that's two arms, and the third arm was plus or minus a PD-1 from B1 to Vimbra, obviously chemo background. And it looks like the data is going to be very, very strong, which is what one should have anticipated based on the previous data. We think we're going to see the data at ASCO GI. They're saying it's going to be early next year, so most likely meeting. And it looks like it's going to be really, really good data. And then, so Jazz went up, Zyme went up. And then Zyme, a day or two later, came out and said that they're going to shift their business model a little bit. The business model was really twofold. One, they have their internal ADC portfolio. They'll continue to work on that. But they're increasingly going to move now to do a royalty-based business model. And even for their own pipeline, they're going to be looking to partner it. They're trying to diversify risk, and they're going to now monetize a lot of future milestones and royalties on Ziihera to then go out and be very flexible as to potentially in-license compounds, developing them and partner them, maybe buy companies or a platform that are undervalued and then monetize it via royalties, even being willing to go out and buy royalties which are undervalued and monetize them. And they announced a $125 million buyback. And Anaptys, of course, recently also announced that they're going to be splitting the company. They do have a common shareholder as well, obviously, both of them. And the concept is really to move away from the traditional risk-heavy single sort of program business model to more of a diversified model. And so that's definitely something we're beginning to see. And the concept is not just to go into businesses and kind of break them up, which is obviously there's one well-known fund that's trying to do that, but rather to now risk mitigate and diversify a little bit. Slightly different model. Curious to see what everybody thinks about it.
Well, thank you for bringing up that model. It's definitely different and certainly seems much more shareholder friendly in terms of redeployment of capital. I know we do just have a couple more minutes, Sam, and you, I know, have some topics you want to get to. So your choice, you can wrap it up.
2 minutes very quickly. Just to add to your own, we're also very excited for the data that's very likely, as he said, was going to come in ASCO GI. So we like the asset, and we like the this setup for that particular trial. Nuvalent had some data, pretty good data. It took us a little while to get our head around the different subgroups, etc. But this is a third generation ALK inhibitor. Enterprise value is now about 7 billion. On the back of the data, they raised 500 million. We think we have a lot of proprietary cancer models. Our ALK model gives them a very meaningful share, pretty much most of second line, but certainly in first line also in ALK inhibitors. We've got a drug that's got potentially similar efficacy to Pfizer's, what I would call is best in class, lorlatinib. But of course, we need to see more longer term duration of response, etc. And it's got AEs that are similar more to alectinib, which is Russia's drug. So it's an interesting space. I mean, I don't want to wake up in one day and find someone's had a Hy's law liver tox, because the liver tox is a little bit higher than what we see with alectinib, but it's early days, and we're positive on this asset and this drug, and possibly an M&A target. And then because of the fact that pharma seems to be buying, just be careful with that. Pharma seems to be buying these kind of assets and these kind of companies. So I'm not saying that I know anything. I don't want to get myself into hot water. And then the next one is Olma, which share price went up, and they raised some money on the back of data from Roche, which showed that the oral SERD that they're developing, Roche's giredestrant, actually worked in a first-line trial, and it is in wild-type patients, ESR1 wild-type patients, which is where people were worried after ESMO that it wouldn't work. So we've ended up in a situation where Olema has got one of the better assets here. Is it the best asset in the class? Well, in the approach, I'm not sure, but it is a very viable product, and I think that's that share price move suggests that investors think that too. So we're looking for data in 2027 potentially, whereas AstraZeneca and Roche will have data in 26. And there was a lot more to say, but I'm going to leave it at that.